Picture this: a frozen Estonian airfield, 2 hours before dawn. The temperature is -14. Fog rolls across cracked Soviet-era tarmac that hasn't seen this much activity since the Cold War. Forklifts are moving in tight, choreographed lines. Soldiers in Baltic camouflage speak in clipped, urgent tones. Crate after crate, unmarked and olive drab, is loaded onto a convoy of flatbed trucks. No journalists, no cameras, no press releases, just the grinding of engines and the hiss of hydraulic lifts. A colonel checks a manifest on a tablet, scrolls through a list so long it takes him 3 full swipes to reach the bottom. He nods once to a lieutenant, and the convoy begins to roll south. Within 72 hours, the contents of those crates will be inside Ukraine. Within 96 hours, Russian commanders on the Eastern Front will begin reporting something they cannot explain. Communication blackouts, drone feeds dissolving into static, GPS coordinates shifting by hundreds of meters, entire battalions suddenly deaf, blind, and exposed. And in the Kremlin, a secure phone line will light up with a single question that nobody wants to answer. What did Estonia just send them? Now, I know what you might be thinking. Estonia, a Baltic nation of 1.3 million people, smaller than most mid-sized American cities. A country you could drive across in 4 hours. How could a nation this small possibly make a superpower scramble? And that, Amanda, is exactly the reaction Moscow was counting on. They dismissed Estonia the way you dismiss a mosquito at a barbecue. Annoying, irrelevant, beneath attention. But here's the thing about mosquitoes. Sometimes they carry something that can bring a giant to its knees. And what Estonia just injected into the Ukrainian battlefield is not a minor irritation. It is a paradigm shift. The old world, the world where small nations watched from the sidelines while great powers dictated the terms of war, that world is dead. It died on a frozen airfield outside Tallinn, and it is never coming back. Let me explain why this matters more than almost anything else happening. For months, the global media has been fixated on the big-ticket items: American ATACMS missiles, German Leopard tanks, French Scalp cruise missiles. And yes, those systems matter, but they are the loud, obvious instruments of war. They make headlines. They fill cable news segments. They are what Moscow expects. What Moscow did not expect is that the single most disruptive contribution would come from a country with a force smaller than the New York City Police Department. According to the Estonian Ministry of Defense, Tallinn has now committed over 540 million euros in military aid since February 2022. That means Estonia has donated the equivalent of 67% of its own defense spending. Per capita, that makes Estonia the single largest military donor to Ukraine on planet Earth. Not the United States, not the United Kingdom, not Germany, Estonia, a country most people cannot find on a map. But the raw financial figure does not tell the real story. The real story is what that money bought. It bought something Russia has no answer for, something far more dangerous being assembled in secret labs. Something dangerous was being assembled in a network of Estonian tech labs that most NATO allies do not even have full access to. You see, Estonia is not just a small country with a big heart. It is one of the most digitally advanced nations on Earth. This is the country that invented Skype, the country that built the world's first fully digital government, where you can vote, pay taxes, and even establish a company entirely online. Estonia's digital ecosystem is so advanced that NATO established its Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence, the CCDCOE, in Tallinn back in 2008. That was not a courtesy posting. And now, all of that expertise, all of that infrastructure, has been weaponized and pointed directly at the Russian military. The latest Estonian aid package, confirmed in early 2025 by Defense Minister Hanno Pevkur, is not just about old howitzers. It is a sophisticated suite. It includes electronic warfare systems, drone platforms, and a cyber warfare toolkit described as the most advanced digital disruption package ever provided. Let me break down what that means in practical battlefield terms, because the technical details here are where the real power lies. First, the electronic warfare component. Estonia has provided Ukraine with a series of next-generation signal jamming systems. Developed in collaboration with the firm Rantalon, these systems operate across a spectrum from 2 MHz to 18 GHz, covering every Russian band. Traditional jammers blast noise across a broad spectrum, like using a sledgehammer to kill a fly. Estonia's systems use AI-driven recognition to be precise. They identify, isolate, and target specific Russian nodes without disrupting friendly frequencies. A Ukrainian team can shut down a command net in 90 seconds. The Russian battalion loses contact with its headquarters, its artillery coordination collapses, its drone operators lose their feed, and its frontline units are left making decisions in a vacuum. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces on the same battlefield continue communicating seamlessly. The second component is even more disruptive. Estonia has built a drone integration ecosystem that connects every type of UAV into a single network. Think of it as an air traffic control system, but for a swarm of killer drones. Developed by Frankenberg Technologies, it allows managing 16 drones at once. This is not theoretical. This is not a PowerPoint briefing at a defense conference. This is operational technology that has already been field tested and is now being deployed on the Ukrainian front lines, and the implications are enormous. They believed their air defense could handle the drone threat. They were wrong. The price is being paid every day in destroyed posts and silenced batteries. Imagine a Ukrainian unit preparing to attack. Under the old model, they send one drone. Under the Estonian model, they launch a coordinated swarm package. 2 recon drones map the trench network in real time. Simultaneously, 4 FPV drones loiter, pre-assigned to specific targets: nests, antennas, caches. The commander taps a target. A drone dives. 3 seconds later, the machine gun nest is gone. He taps another. The communications antenna disintegrates. By the time the assault infantry moves forward, the trench line has been systematically disarmed from above, and the surviving defenders are disoriented, disconnected, and unable to call for support. This is not science fiction. This is happening right now. And it is happening because a country of 1.3 million people decided that innovation matters more than size. But the real shock was not the drones, it was the third component, the cyber warfare toolkit. This triggered an emergency session at Russia's general staff. Details here are the most closely guarded. Intelligence sources paint a picture that should terrify anyone sitting in a Russian military headquarters. Estonia's CCDCOE has been conducting joint training exercises with Ukrainian cyber units since at least mid-2023. These exercises focused on 3 core capabilities. First, network penetration and exploitation. Second, data corruption. And third, infrastructure disruption. In January, Russian forces in Zaporizhzhia reported cascading failures. Secure radios were dropping, encrypted channels were misfiring. Digital chaos. One Russian blogger wrote, "It was as if someone had reached inside our command network and rearranged the furniture while we were sleeping." The level of sophistication displayed in the Zaporizhzhia incident was consistent with state-level cyber capabilities, typically associated with top-tier NATO members, not a nation of Estonia's size. Estonia had punched so far above its weight. General Martin Herem said, "What we have built is not a weapon, it is a living system, and the longer this war continues, the smarter it becomes." Now, let me pull back from the tactical level for a moment, because this story has dimensions that extend far beyond the Ukrainian battlefield. What Estonia has accomplished carries profound implications for the entire global security architecture, and understanding those implications requires examining 3 possible scenarios for how this plays out. The first scenario is managed integration. In this scenario, NATO formally adopts the Estonian model as a template for allied cyber and electronic warfare doctrine. The CCDCOE in Tallinn becomes the central hub for developing and distributing these capabilities across the alliance. Smaller NATO members, countries like Latvia, Lithuania, the Czech Republic, and Portugal, invest heavily in digital warfare capabilities, creating a distributed network of cyber-capable nations that collectively form an electronic warfare shield across Europe. Russia, facing this networked digital threat, is forced to divert massive resources away from conventional force modernization towards cyber defense, fundamentally altering its military spending priorities and slowing its ability to regenerate combat power. Under this scenario, the war in Ukraine gradually shifts in Kyiv's favor as Russian command and control capabilities are systematically degraded across every sector of the front. Negotiations eventually begin, not because of diplomatic pressure, but because Russia's military can no longer effectively coordinate offensive operations. This is the optimistic scenario, and it is the one that NATO planners in Brussels are quietly hoping for. The second scenario is regional escalation. In this scenario, Russia, unable to counter Estonia's digital capabilities on the battlefield, decides to respond asymmetrically by targeting Estonia directly, not with a conventional military attack, which would trigger NATO Article 5 and a full alliance response, but with a massive cyber assault on Estonian civilian infrastructure, power grids, banking systems, government databases, transportation networks. Russia has demonstrated this capability before, most notably in the 2007 cyber attacks against Estonia that crippled the country's digital infrastructure for weeks. A sustained cyber campaign could create a humanitarian crisis without a single shot being fired, and it would test NATO's willingness to invoke collective defense in response to a non-kinetic attack. This is the scenario that keeps Estonian security officials awake at night, and it is the reason why Tallinn has been aggressively lobbying NATO to formally define a major cyber attack as an Article 5 trigger. The alliance has made vague statements in this direction, but no binding commitment has been made. And in the world of deterrence, ambiguity is not a strength, it is an invitation. The third scenario is the most dangerous, and the one that very few people are willing to discuss publicly: total doctrinal revolution. In this scenario, the success of Estonia's digital warfare model does not just influence the Ukraine conflict, it fundamentally rewrites the global rules of military power. The world enters a new arms race, not for missiles or warships, but for algorithms and exploits. And unlike nuclear weapons, which require massive industrial infrastructure and are therefore limited to a handful of states, cyber weapons can be developed by any nation with a sufficient talent pool and internet access. A country does not need a $500 billion defense budget to cripple an adversary if it has a $500 million cyber program and the right people running it. Estonia has just proven that, and every intelligence agency on Earth has taken notice. While these three scenarios play out in the planning rooms and think tanks of the world's capitals, the immediate reality on the ground in Ukraine is more concrete and more urgent. The Estonian systems are working. In March 2025, Hanno Pevkur announced an additional €120 million aid package, the largest in Estonian history. Furthermore, Estonia has begun hosting Ukrainian technical personnel at training facilities outside Tallinn, where they are learning not just how to operate the current systems, but how to maintain, modify, and eventually manufacture similar systems independently. This is not just aid, it is technology transfer. Estonia is teaching Ukraine to fish, and the fish in question are digital weapons that Russia has no net for. The response from Moscow has been, predictably, a mixture of public dismissal and private panic. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, when asked about Estonia's military aid at a press briefing, offered a thin smile and said, quote, "We do not comment on the toys of small countries," end quote. But behind that smile, the reality is very different. Russian military bloggers, many of whom have direct connections to frontline units, have been sounding increasingly desperate alarms. A Russian blogger posted a warning: "We are losing the electronic war. A blind army is a dead army." The message spread before it was censored. For 2 decades, Vladimir Putin has built his political legitimacy on the narrative that Russia is a great power, a military colossus that commands respect through strength. That narrative requires an audience that believes in Russian military dominance. The symbolic power of that demonstration is incalculable. It tells every small nation on Russia's periphery that they are not helpless. It tells every Russian general that size is no longer a guarantee of superiority. The old maps of military power are being redrawn, and the cartographer is not Washington or Moscow. It is Tallinn, a small, cold, digital fortress. Russia looked at Estonia and saw a mosquito, but that mosquito was carrying a payload that no amount of armor, no number of tanks, no volume of artillery shells can defend against. And now, on a 14-kilometer stretch of front line in southern Donetsk, in the static-filled silence of dead Russian radios, in the thermal glow of drone cameras circling patiently overhead, the consequences of that miscalculation are playing out in real time. Amanda, the world is watching the big players, the superpowers, the nuclear arsenals, the trillion-dollar defense budgets. But history has a habit of being written not by the giants, but by the small nations that refuse to accept that small means irrelevant. Estonia has sent a message to Russia, to NATO, and to every nation on Earth. That message is simple, and it is final. In the age of digital warfare, the size of your army matters less than the quality of your code, and on that front, the giant has already lost.